The call came at 3:47 in the morning. A secure line that was never supposed to ring unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. On the other end, a voice that FBI headquarters hadn't heard in 11 months. A deep cover operative embedded within Iran's Ministry of Intelligence. He spoke 4 words before the line went dead. "They know about Cardinal." In that moment, everything changed. Years of carefully constructed intelligence operations, dozens of protected sources, and the most valuable asset American counterintelligence had ever cultivated inside the Islamic Republic, all of it balanced on the edge of exposure. But the warning itself was impossible. Cardinal's identity was protected by layers of security that should have been impenetrable. Only a handful of people in the entire United States intelligence community knew the true name behind the cryptonym. For that information to reach Iranian ears meant something unthinkable. The breach wasn't external. It was coming from inside the FBI itself. The investigation that followed would become the most closely guarded secret in Bureau history. An operation so sensitive that its existence was known to fewer than 10 people. What they discovered would shake the foundations of American counterintelligence. 2 moles had been operating within the FBI for years. They had built a network of compromised personnel that extended across divisions and field offices. 5 FBI employees would ultimately be arrested, 7 sources would be confirmed dead, and the race to save Cardinal would come down to a margin of just 4 days. This is the story of how the FBI hunted traitors within its own ranks and prevented the greatest counterintelligence catastrophe in American history. The first indication that something was wrong came not from dramatic failures, but from subtle patterns. FBI operations against Iranian intelligence had always been difficult. The IRGC and MOIS were sophisticated adversaries with decades of experience in counterintelligence tradecraft. Failures were expected. But the nature of the failures had changed. Beginning in early 2022, FBI surveillance teams noticed that their targets had developed an uncanny ability to avoid detection. An IRGC officer would change his routine the day before a coverage operation began. A suspected procurement agent would suddenly relocate hours before a planned arrest. Iranian diplomats would cancel meetings that the FBI had only just learned about. Individually, each incident could be explained. Coincidence, good tradecraft, random luck. But counterintelligence analysts began tracking the failures, and the numbers told a different story. Over a 30-month period, the FBI launched 27 significant operations targeting Iranian intelligence activities on American soil and in allied nations. 21 of those operations failed to achieve their objectives. That was a 78% failure rate. Statistical analysis showed the probability of that occurring through chance alone was less than 1 in 10,000. Something was feeding Iranian intelligence advance warning of FBI operations. The question was what, or more precisely, who? The director authorized an investigation unlike anything the Bureau had attempted before. It would operate completely outside normal channels. No official case file, no electronic records in standard systems, no briefings to oversight committees. The assumption had to be that the penetration could be anywhere, including positions that would normally have visibility into counterintelligence investigations. The investigation received a code name: Mirror Hunt. Its mandate was simple: find the source of the leaks, find it before more people died. The Mirror Hunt team was assembled with extraordinary care. Each member was selected based on criteria designed to minimize the possibility that they themselves could be compromised. No involvement in Iran operations, no personal connections to Iranian communities, no foreign travel to countries where Iranian intelligence was known to operate aggressively. Most importantly, each member had undergone recent polygraph examinations and financial reviews that showed no anomalies. They were brought together in a secure facility and briefed only on what they needed to know. There was a suspected breach of counterintelligence information. Their job was to find it. The full scope of what they were hunting, years of betrayal, multiple moles, dead sources around the world, was too sensitive to share even with investigators who held the highest clearances. They began with the failures. Every compromised operation was examined in exhaustive detail. Who had known about it? When had they known? How had the information been distributed? The goal was to identify common threads, people who had access to multiple failed operations. The analysis took weeks. It required reviewing thousands of documents, hundreds of personnel files, and constructing elaborate matrices of who knew what and when. The breakthrough came through a process that analysts called intersection mapping. Of the 21 failed operations, 16 shared a single common element. They had all been discussed in a weekly interagency coordination meeting held at FBI headquarters. The meeting included representatives from multiple intelligence agencies. Its purpose was to prevent duplication of effort and ensure coordinated approaches to Iranian targets. Attendees received briefing packets that included operational summaries, target profiles, and planned activities. The meeting was a nexus point. Someone in that room was reporting to Tehran. Mirror Hunt investigators compiled a list of every regular attendee. 34 individuals had attended at least half of the meetings during the relevant period. Each became a subject of intensive scrutiny. Financial records, travel patterns, communication logs, personal associations, behavioral indicators that might suggest divided loyalties. The investigation proceeded with agonizing patience. Any misstep could alert the mole and cause them to go dormant, or worse, trigger immediate action against sources who might be exposed. 2 months into the analysis, a name emerged: a supervisory special agent in the Counterintelligence division. His position gave him access to virtually every Iran-related operation the Bureau conducted. He had attended every compromised meeting. His responsibilities included reviewing and approving operational plans before they were executed. If he was the mole, he had been positioned perfectly to cause maximum damage. The indicators were subtle but cumulative. His personal finances showed income that slightly exceeded what his salary and investments could explain. The amounts were small, a few $1,000s here and there, but they formed a pattern that didn't match any legitimate source. His travel records included layovers and side trips that didn't appear in official Bureau documentation. 3 times in the previous 2 years, his personal phone had shown gaps in location data during periods when he should have been at documented locations. Individually, each anomaly could be explained innocently. Together, they painted a picture that demanded investigation. Physical surveillance was authorized at the highest level. For 3 weeks, FBI surveillance teams followed the supervisor without his knowledge. They documented his movements, his meetings, his patterns. What they discovered confirmed their worst fears. The supervisor was meeting regularly with an individual who should have been nowhere near an FBI counterintelligence official. Facial recognition identified him as a known Iranian intelligence officer operating under diplomatic cover at Iran's mission to the United Nations. He was MOIS, Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security, with a documented history of running human sources in Western intelligence services. The meetings followed classic tradecraft patterns: brief encounters in public places, restaurants, parks, shopping areas, quick exchanges of small packages, minimal conversation, professional and disciplined. The FBI supervisor was a confirmed Iranian asset. But Mirror Hunt investigators knew immediately that he couldn't be operating alone. The pattern of compromises was too broad. The failures were too diverse. One source, even one as well-positioned as this supervisor, couldn't explain everything. There were more moles. The investigation expanded with new urgency. If one FBI employee could be recruited, the penetration might be much deeper than anyone had imagined. Every person with significant access to Iran operations became a potential suspect. The criteria were refined: access to the specific operations that had been compromised, opportunity to communicate with external handlers, any behavioral indicator, no matter how small, that might suggest divided loyalties, Over the following weeks, 4 additional suspects emerged. Each one sent chills through the mirror hunt team. A senior analyst in the Counterintelligence division who prepared briefing materials for FBI leadership. Her work product was distributed to nearly every major Iran operation. She had access to source identities that were supposed to be compartmentalized at the highest level. A special agent in the New York field office who served as a liaison with Allied intelligence services. He attended briefings on joint operations with foreign partners. Several of those operations had failed in ways that suggested advance warning to Iranian targets. His finances showed unexplained improvements that coincided suspiciously with the timeline of compromises. A technical specialist in the FBI's Communications Security Division. Her position gave her access to encrypted channels used for source communications. If those channels had been compromised, it would explain how source identities had been exposed. A staff operations specialist who managed logistics for sensitive operations. He knew when raids would occur, where surveillance teams would be positioned, which targets would be approached for recruitment. Information that had clearly reached Iranian hands. 5 FBI employees, 5 potential traitors. The scope of the penetration was almost incomprehensible. But the most urgent concern wasn't the damage already done. It was the damage that was about to occur. Deep within the investigation's findings was a discovery that changed everything. The analyst had been accessing files she had no authorization to view through a combination of social engineering, exploiting colleagues' trust to gain passwords and access, and system vulnerabilities that security protocols should have prevented. She had been assembling fragments of information. Those fragments, when combined, would reveal the identity of a source known only by the cryptonym Cardinal. Cardinal was the crown jewel of American intelligence operations against Iran. Recruited 13 years earlier under circumstances that remained highly classified, Cardinal had provided intelligence that transformed American understanding of Iranian intentions and capabilities. Terrorist plots had been disrupted because of Cardinal's warnings. Iranian assassination operations against dissidents in Europe and America had been prevented. Crucial details about Iran's nuclear program had been revealed, informing international negotiations and policy decisions. Cardinal's identity was protected by extraordinary measures. Only 7 people in the entire FBI were supposed to know the source's true name. Intelligence reports were sanitized through multiple channels before reaching analysts. Every precaution possible had been taken against exactly the scenario now unfolding. But the analyst had been patient. For 6 years, she had collected fragments, a reference in one document, a detail in another, patterns that individually meant nothing. Together, they formed a puzzle she was about to complete. Intercepted communications revealed her intention. Within 4 days, she planned to transmit her findings to her Iranian handlers. When that transmission occurred, Cardinal would be exposed. Iranian security services would move immediately. Arrest, interrogation, torture, execution. 13 years of irreplaceable intelligence would end. A human being who had risked everything to help America would die because of treachery within the FBI itself. The countdown had begun. 4 days to identify the full extent of the penetration. 4 days to prepare an operation that would neutralize 5 trained FBI personnel simultaneously. 4 days to extract Cardinal before Iranian intelligence could act. 4 days to prevent the greatest counterintelligence disaster in American history. Operation Looking Glass was authorized immediately. The operational challenges were unprecedented. 5 FBI employees had to be arrested at precisely the same moment. Any warning, even a few seconds of advance notice, could allow them to alert their handlers. A single phone call, a single text message could trigger immediate action against Cardinal. The arrests had to be perfect. But arresting FBI agents presented unique complications. They were trained in surveillance detection. They had access to bureau systems that might reveal investigation activity. They had colleagues throughout the organization who might inadvertently tip them off. The Looking-Glass team developed a plan built on deception and precision. Each target would receive a summons to a meeting under a plausible pretext: a budget review, a personnel matter, an operational consultation, nothing that would trigger suspicion. Tactical teams would be pre-positioned at each location. The arrests would occur within a 60-second window, simultaneous takedowns across Washington, New York, and Quantico. The final 4 days were a masterwork of controlled tension. Mirror hunt investigators maintained 24-hour surveillance on all 5 suspects. Any indication that they sensed investigation would require immediate action, potentially compromising the entire operation. The supervisor continued his routine. He attended meetings. He reviewed operational plans. He met twice more with his Iranian handler, meetings that were documented but not interrupted. The analyst continued her work assembling the Cardinal puzzle. She accessed files. She made notes. She had no idea that every keystroke was being recorded, every movement watched. The other 3 suspects maintained their normal patterns: work, home, weekend activities, ordinary lives concealing extraordinary betrayal. 72 hours before the scheduled transmission, the Looking-Glass team was ready. The operation launched at 5:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Each target received their summons through normal channels. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. At 5 locations across 3 states, tactical teams waited in position. The supervisor arrived at FBI headquarters for what he believed was a routine budget meeting. He stepped off the elevator and found himself surrounded by agents he didn't recognize. His credentials were taken. His phone was seized. He was informed he was under arrest for espionage against the United States. His face showed nothing. He said nothing. In New York, the liaison agent walked into a conference room expecting to receive a commendation for recent work. Instead, he received handcuffs and Miranda warnings. At Quantico, the technical specialist was detained at her workstation. FBI cyber teams simultaneously locked her access to all systems, preventing any attempt to send warning communications. At an off-site location in Virginia, the analyst arrived for what she believed was a meeting with a potential source. She had brought documents she intended to photograph, evidence that would be used against her at trial. The operations specialist was taken at his home. Tactical teams executing a search warrant found $52,000 in cash hidden in his basement, along with encrypted communication devices of foreign manufacture. By 6:03 a.m., all 5 suspects were in custody. The 60-second window had held. No warnings had been sent. The interrogations began immediately. Each suspect was held in complete isolation. None knew whether their colleagues had been arrested. None knew what evidence the FBI possessed. The Mirror Hunt team exploited this uncertainty ruthlessly. The supervisor requested a cooperation agreement within 8 hours. Confronted with surveillance footage of his meetings with Iranian intelligence, he recognized that denial was pointless. His only path to avoiding execution was full cooperation. His story emerged in fragments over days of questioning. The recruitment had begun 7 years earlier during a vacation in Dubai. A woman had approached him at a hotel bar. She was beautiful, engaging, interested in his work. The relationship had progressed. He had shared information he shouldn't have shared, initially just impressions and opinions, nothing classified. Then the photographs had appeared, compromising images that would destroy his marriage and his career. When the demands for real intelligence began, he was already too compromised to resist. The payments had started at $3,000 per month. By the end, he was receiving $30,000 for significant intelligence deliveries. He had justified it to himself in various ways. The information wasn't that sensitive. Iran wasn't really an enemy. He was just evening out an unfair playing field. The justifications were hollow. He knew what he was doing. He did it anyway. The analyst presented a different challenge. Unlike the supervisor, she showed no regret, no willingness to cooperate, no recognition that she had done anything wrong. Her parents had left Iran before the revolution, but she had been raised with deep grievances about American interference in Iranian affairs. The coup of 1953, the support for the Shah, the sanctions that harmed ordinary Iranians. In her mind, she was a patriot serving her true nation. Her recruitment hadn't required blackmail or money. She had volunteered. A contact in the Iranian-American community had recognized her sympathies and made an introduction. For 7 years, she had been providing information to Iranian intelligence, longer than any other member of the network, more damaging than any other source. The source identities she had compromised, the operations she had sabotaged, the Cardinal identification she had nearly completed. When investigators described the sources who had died because of her betrayal, she showed no remorse. They were traitors, she said. They deserved what happened to them. She demanded a lawyer and refused further cooperation. The information extracted from cooperating suspects revealed the architecture of Iranian penetration. The network had been built deliberately over nearly a decade. Iranian intelligence had identified FBI personnel with access to Iran operations and assessed them for potential recruitment. The approaches were tailored to individual vulnerabilities. Those with financial pressures received money. Those with personal secrets received blackmail. Those with ideological sympathies received validation and purpose. The network was compartmentalized to limit damage. Each member knew only their own handler and had limited awareness of other sources. The supervisor knew the network existed but didn't know the other members' identities. The analyst knew she wasn't alone but couldn't identify her colleagues. The structure was sophisticated, but it hadn't been sophisticated enough. The supervisor's meetings had been too frequent. The analyst's system access had left traces. The financial anomalies had accumulated. Iranian intelligence had built an impressive operation. They had underestimated American counterintelligence capabilities. Cardinal was extracted within hours of the arrests. Secure channels that had been dormant for months activated with a single coded message. The extraction protocols were prepared for exactly this scenario, developed years earlier against the possibility of exactly this kind of catastrophic compromise. The details remain classified and will likely stay so for decades. The route Cardinal traveled, the methods used to cross borders, the allied services that provided assistance, all of it protected to preserve capabilities for future operations. What can be said is that within 40 hours of the Looking Glass arrests, Cardinal was out of Iran. The most valuable source in American counterintelligence had been saved with 4 days to spare. Cardinal now lives under a protected identity in a location that will never be disclosed. 13 years of service to American intelligence concluded not with betrayal and death, but with extraction and safety. It was the operation's greatest success. The prosecution that followed became the largest espionage case against FBI personnel in the Bureau's history. The charges were comprehensive: conspiracy to commit espionage, transmission of classified information to a foreign government, for those whose betrayal led directly to source deaths, conspiracy to commit murder. Several charges carried potential death penalties. The supervisor, the liaison agent, the technical specialist, and the operations specialist all ultimately accepted plea agreements. Each received life sentences without possibility of parole. Each agreed to cooperate fully with ongoing damage assessments. Their cooperation revealed additional details about Iranian recruitment methods, communication protocols, and intelligence priorities, information that would inform defensive measures for years to come. The analyst went to trial. She rejected all plea offers. She maintained throughout that her actions were justified, that she was a political prisoner being persecuted for her beliefs. Her defense argued that American policy toward Iran was itself criminal, that she had been serving a higher moral purpose. The jury was unconvinced. After 3 weeks of testimony and 4 hours of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge imposed a death sentence. Appeals continue. The sentence will likely be commuted, but she will never leave federal custody. The damage assessment required years to complete. Its findings were devastating. The 5 moles had compromised virtually every significant FBI operation against Iran during their period of activity. They had exposed dozens of sources, human beings who had trusted the United States to protect them. At least 7 of those sources were confirmed dead, executed by Iranian authorities after being identified through information provided by the moles. Others had been arrested and remained in Iranian prisons. Still others had simply disappeared, their fates unknown. The moles had provided Iranian intelligence with comprehensive understanding of FBI methods, capabilities, and limitations. This knowledge would inform Iranian operations for years, perhaps decades. Countermeasures that had taken years to develop were now compromised. Techniques that had provided crucial advantages were now known to adversaries. The damage extended beyond American operations. Allied intelligence services had shared information with the FBI, trusting that it would be protected. That trust had been violated. Foreign partners now questioned whether their sources had been exposed. Some reduced information sharing. Others demanded reviews of joint operations. The full cost would never be calculated. The investigation exposed systemic failures in FBI security that demanded reform. How had 5 employees been recruited without detection? How had their activities continued for years? How had the pattern of operational failures not triggered earlier investigation?